These three chapters in the Gambrill text address implementation of the plans that we have designed for our clients a little more, as well as takes a look at how to go about developing some of the behaviors and skills that the client may need in order to interact more successfully with persons around him or her and the environment in which the client lives. Now, implementing the plan really, involves us having to take a look at the resources that are available and trying to match it up to the capacities of the client and to the goal that really we want to achieve, the desired outcome. There are times when the resources that are needed aren't available, and the only thing the worker can do is to provide support in coping with this particular issue that the client is living with. But that's, of course, the least desirable of the roles that we would play in a client's life. So instead, what we want to try to do is to identify those needs, document those needs, identify the resources that are there, and if they're not there, documenting that the resources are lacking, and then begin to advocate for those resources to be made available to the client. If there are policies that hinder clients' opportunities to participate fully in society, you might want to advocate and work through social action to try to change those policies and to correct that error in the environment. But sometimes that takes years, literally years, to change and to achieve. And so there are there are those situations where we're going to need to just focus upon helping the client to adjust as much as possible and to cope successfully with the environment as it is. But successful plans are really based on a number of different things, and one of the things is the degree of match between the worker's view of the problem and the client's view of those concerns. So there really needs to be some discussions. I mean, we enter into situations, particularly cases where clients are mandated to work with us, where we have or the system has a certain view of what the problem is in the client's life and what it is that needs to be fixed. But from our client's perspective, the problems may be an entirely different set or a different array of issues, and so we want to be able to talk with the client about how they perceive their situation, and as much as possible match up our view of the problems to their view as well. And if we agree upon that, then we're more likely to have success in achieving goals. I think that kind of is common sense. And if really kind of paying attention to what the client wants and affirming the client in that respect really helps to promote positive outcomes, more than any kind of, as this says, more than any kind of empirically supported treatment approaches might make. Really is about connecting with your client and seeing things where the client is, understanding things from that perspective. As we've talked about previously, empathy aids that effectiveness more so than all the years of training and experience you might have. And if it isn't, empathy isn't a thing that you have or you don't have. It is a skill. It's a talent that can be perfected and can be developed. And if you do find, as happens sometimes with us, that we have difficulty with empathy with our clients, it's probably a good idea to get out there and try to define some ways to develop that empathy, your ability to empathize with clients, because it is something that can be learned as well. Worker knowledge, worker skills, the things that you get to assess the needs are more important than the number of hours that you put into education. Sometimes just having that knowledge is the most important thing that can contribute to success in developing and implementing plans. So you have to decide what you're going to do, and there's a number of different ways to intervene in client situations, so that here they talk about changing the thoughts and feelings of the client or changing their behaviors, or do we alter the environment in which they live, or do we take a whole series of approaches, both individual and environmentally suited. That's where the contextual assessment comes in, I think, to be able to look at all of those areas and determine what intervention interventions are best regardless of whatever level we're going to intervene on. It's also possible that doing nothing is the preferred approach, but usually that's not going to be the case with the clients that we encounter. So we have to determine what level of intervention we're gonna use or to focus upon: individual, family, group, organization, service system, legislative. All those different kinds of levels of intervention may be necessary. Where we're going to intervene, is it going to be in the home or the school or at the agency, or and also how intense the service is going to be, who's going to be involved, what methods we're going to use. There's a number of different things that we have to determine in concert with our client in order to set up an effective plan. So usually we have to, as this slide suggests, we have to work at many different levels. It isn't just about working with this individual, but many different levels and engaging a lot of different people, oftentimes significant others, sometimes other professionals through referrals and the team approach. All of those kinds of things are things that can really help make our plans effective. And these roles, you might be carrying out one role or another in working with clients, several of these roles at one time. As this slide says, carrying out one role often involves taking on other roles as well. So these are just some of the things that you're going to do in the course of working with individuals. And again, offering support to the client is such an important aspect through all phases of our work and all the roles that we do fill. There are different kinds of things to consider when you create an assignment or an action step, something that the client is going to act on. This is where I think, as I look back over the years of my practice, in residential treatment, in child protection in two different states. In my first job in child protection was in the it was in the mid 70s in Central Florida. And my last job was in child protection in 2014. When I retired from the state of Alaska. And in between, I had other roles. But the thing is that when I look at how we did our work and what we focused on in the 1970s versus how we do our work and what we focused on in the new millennium, there's really quite a bit of differences. That if you look at the case records from the mid 70s, which at that time seemed to be very advanced compared to the records that I read from the 50s, with some of my long-term clients. The records we kept wouldn't be nearly considered sufficient today, and the way we developed our plans at that time was a much more informal kind of process. So there's some good things and bad things about that. I think the good things are, well, let me start with the bad things, and I think a lot of the difficulty we have with planning today is that, as you might have noticed from the case plan when we looked at the OCS case plan, it's very complicated. It's pretty complex, and this is a simpler case plan than even when I left the agency, some years before. Same thing has happened in the mental health system. The treatment plans they were called there became much more complicated than they were when I began working in the mental health system just 7 or 8 years earlier in Alaska. And a lot of that has to do with insurance requirements and documentation requirements and malpractice insurance requirements and all of those kinds of things, that certain things have to be documented and they have to be spelled out in certain ways. And so for a while in OCS, I think we were presenting case plans to clients that were pages and pages and pages long, and particularly for individuals who, whose educational level may not even been that high to begin with. I mean, it's pretty daunting and overwhelming and very discouraging from the start. And so the good thing about this is that we are at least making an effort to spell out what it is that we think the client needs to do in order to improve situation. This includes with voluntary clients as well. We have to have an agreement. The client has to understand what we're working on and why we're implementing the plans that we're implementing. So putting it down in writing is something that everybody can see and hopefully can agree upon. But we have to be careful about the wording and all of that so that we're sure our client understands what we're addressing. But then, do we have an agreement on what the outcome is that we want to pursue? Again, putting it in writing, it at least gives us some kind of assurance that we both know what it is that we're working towards, and making sure it's described in a way that's clear and understandable, particularly to the client. And of course, as Gambrill talks about with evidence-based practice, we want to also have some notion that there's research that supports the notion that what we're doing is going to actually reach this outcome, going to actually have an impact upon this outcome. We want to make sure the client understands things, that the client has the skills that are necessary to carry out the plan, and if not, then our plan needs to step back and work on some skill building with the client, and we'll be talking about that here in a few moments. Focusing on positive behaviors, not so much stopping things, but rather starting things that are contrary to whatever negative behaviors might be out there that are perhaps mutually exclusive of those problem behaviors. These kinds of things, there's a whole array of factors to consider when we're developing a plan, as you can see here. More of the same in a way, I guess. Just be sure that the plans are clearly described, that they have time frames. Remember, time frames is another term for deadlines, I suppose, and deadlines can seem to be threatening to persons, and we don't want to present it in that way. But it also puts some boundaries, I suppose, is the word, upon the work. Some sort of a sense of direction about when something should be achieved, and for a lot of people that can be very motivating. That can help get individuals moving. Plans should be given to the client in writing. They should be things that the client agrees to. And if you work for an agency with involuntary clients and the client doesn't agree to the plan, you should be very clear on the efforts that you've made to to try to enlist the client's agreement, and to try to accommodate the client in whatever way possible to make the plan, keeping it meaningful and purposeful, but still to engage the client in that work. A lot of times clients, your clients may resist the goal because they don't see it as being very feasible. Again, that may have something to do with motivating the client. It might have to do with being sure that we have goals and outcomes that the client agrees is useful to them. Cultural sensitivity, of course, is another area that we have to focus upon in developing these goals. If at all possible, least restrictive interventions whenever possible. And the most normal kinds of living situations for clients. Keeping children in the home when you can to assure their safety, as opposed to putting them in foster care. If you have children with problem behaviors, not rushing to put them in institutions to correct their behaviors or psychiatric facilities, but rather seeing if there are ways that you can safely and effectively treat those issues in the home, so that the client has a normal life experience as much as possible. This is all about least restrictive interventions, I think. And the last point here in this list too, about considering the impact of the plan on significant others, because if your client or client system changes, those around that client or client system are also going to have to make some adjustments and change. Remember, I told you some weeks ago, I believe, about a supervisor mentor that I had years ago who used to talk about family systems and how in order to get along in any kind of a home life setting, families develop this sort of dance regarding their behaviors and their attitudes, so that they all live together effectively. Now, there may be some illnesses and dysfunction in that dance and in the steps, the things they have to do to get along with each other. And so if you go in to correct those dysfunctions, that alters the steps that everyone else around that person has to make as well. There has to be changes in other individuals, and if you don't consider all those things, people wind up stepping on each other's toes. As long as we're going to talk about this metaphor of the dance, and it really kind of destroys the whole system. And so, this is one reason why I think clients sometimes fail in changing behaviors if preparation hasn't been made to address the impact of the changes on the people around the client. So keep that in mind. That's an important point there, I think. So we want to empower our clients through skill building, and this involves in part providing information to the clients so that they're able to reach the outcomes they desire. Our goal really isn't to so much to be the person who creates the change so that the client's life is better, but rather to be the person that helps the client create the change so that their life becomes better. We want to be able to make ourselves unnecessary, so to speak, in the client's life, through our interventions, so that they're not dependent upon us to continue to do well, because we're not going to be there all the time. We're not going to be there for long, probably even. So get them information about how to obtain services, what to do if they're denied services that they should be allowed to have, where they can find self-help and support groups, how to get information, also how the socio-political environment has something to do with their personal troubles, because if they understand the bigger picture and how their circumstances are in part created by the larger institutional system around them, that can help them. Well, just having that knowledge, it makes them more effective in trying to decide how to deal with it, even if sometimes those changes are bigger than any of us. Knowing about the things that are creating our issues can go a long way to empowering us to be able to do something about it. Teaching your client about developmental norms. This is something very important for families with children, families with elderly persons, individuals going through life stage changes, and because all of that has an impact on our lives. So and again, all these other kinds of things where I think information helps our clients take charge of their life, and we can assist them in gaining that information. Helping those clients to understand how their behavior is influenced by their environment and how they in turn influence their environments can be a first step to change the troubling thoughts and behaviors and feelings that they have. And this is where, again, where the contextual approach in your assessment really comes in and helps to highlight all these other influences on personal and social problems. If troubling behaviors are understood in their context, that is, in relation to their functions, the behavior has a function. And so if we understand the behavior in relation to the function, then the problems, those behaviors become reframed into a different light. And there's the example, I think this is actually the example that I added in on this slide, which is teaching domestic violence victims, that the abuse that goes on in their relationship is a part of a cycle of violence. It helps them to begin to understand that it is a repeating problem, and may help victims make a decision to exit a situation, to get out of a situation that is very destructive and harmful to them. A lot of times DV victims are convinced that it was a one-time thing, or this isn't the guy that they married, that this is not like him, and they'll continue to hold on to those beliefs, oftentimes through a series of episodes of abuse, before they finally decide it's time to break away. Then there's a whole host of other problems associated with breaking away, which complicates it even further. But I think one of the first things that has to happen is that the victim needs to come to understand that this isn't about the fact that they didn't hang the towel just properly, or that dinner was late one night, or that something might have gotten burned, or the kids were too noisy when he was trying to sleep. That this is about other things, and that there is a pattern here, and it just might empower the individual to get out of that situation. Helping your client to understand those concerns in a new light, then it really gives them um, some agency, some self-efficacy in addressing um, the goals that they have in their life. And there are different kinds of approaches, like they mentioned dialectical behavior therapy in the text, that encourage a realistic perspective on the situation, and it kind of gives them a notion that change can be pursued um, even though the times are very difficult. And well, that their life isn't as good as they want it to be. So this slide also points out, and Gambrill mentions again, that providing information about the larger environment, the socio-political, economic kinds of underpinnings of their problems, um, can help counter the messages they get from society about how their situation is really all about their own failures. And this is a part of social action, really, is educating your clients to not fall into the belief of those myths, which will otherwise create self-fulfilling prophecies in many respects. Specific kinds of skill buildings can help your clients address problem behaviors, and there's a number of different um, ways to go about that are mentioned here. Social skills training that teaches them how to be more effective in their interactions and have more influence over their environment. Things like role play training and modeling behaviors and assertiveness training, such things as that. Improving self-management skills, so that they can manage their behavior in the here and now to achieve the kinds of goals that they want. They can change destructive habits like smoking or drinking, perhaps, decreasing problem behaviors, helping your clients to change their thoughts and their self statements so that they can see themselves and see the world around them differently and more constructively through interventions that involve cognitive restructuring, reframing things, the use of thought stopping, uh, cognitive behavioral therapy, etc., etc. Problem solving training, so that there's all sorts of different kinds of approaches depending upon the nature of the behavior or the nature of the problem and the kinds of things that you want to achieve with interventions, and also enhancing their capacity to manage their own emotions, which really um, changes the world around them. They not only does managing one's thoughts then help the individual to manage their emotions, but also changing behaviors can also change emotions. The kinds of things that you do can improve your outlook and improve and reduce negative emotions. Such things like exercise, stress management, cognitive behavioral interventions, relaxation training, all of those kinds of things. When I was working at mental health, I had some clients who were very physically oriented, others who were more intellectually oriented, and so for stress management kinds of things, I would, with the individuals who were more of a had a more physical kind of approach to things. Um, even in a therapy session, you could teach what's called deep muscle relaxation. It was a kind of a technique to work from head to toes, and relaxing muscles and things like that. And it was a great stress management technique. It was very relaxing to troubled clients. Whereas those clients who were kind of more in their heads, so to speak, more of an intellectual type. Uh, Meditation training was something that could be very useful for them. It was something that they could understand and relate to, and feel could be effective in also bringing about relaxation. So lots of different ways you can approach teaching clients how to manage their emotions. In doing that, then improving their capacity to function in life. The contextual assessment gives you an opportunity to take a look at whether you can alter the contingencies in the environment in order to change behaviors. This goes back to our talk a few weeks back on observing behaviors and observations and things like this. And actually, this chapter in some ways might have connected better with that particular discussion than it does with this, but it just kind of brings us back to that discussion. Um, when we talk about changing clients' behaviors, it does sound a little bit like we're blaming the individual, like saying that they have some sort of illness or deficiency, that medical, psychological, biomedical kind of focus, and we don't want to, as this says, we don't want to discount individually focused methods of intervention, because sometimes those interventions allow the individual to become more effective in dealing with their system. And so, you want to look at what's the purpose of changing the behavior of the individual, when you try to determine whether or not that's the effective way to resolve it. So this goes into a discussion of the relationship between behavior and the contingencies, the environment, that connect to the behavior, and this can be a valuable intervention, really, at all levels of intervention, really, not just the individual. But a contextual assessment that considers the contingencies in the environment decrease the likelihood of victim blaming and avoid the fundamental attribution error, so that instead of saying this person has a problem, or this person has a condition, this person has an illness, we look instead at what's going on in the environment around that person that explains those behaviors, instead of saying the behavior is a result of an illness. And so that's where we look at rearranging contingencies. Now, another contingency management, really, you're talking about behavioral interventions in many respects, and there's a lot of myths about contingency management. When I one of my most favorite jobs was working at a residential treatment program for adolescents who were thought to be ungovernable. And I talked about this program before, and we worked with the parents as well in trying to help them find ways to change their own approach to their kids so that they'd be more effective with them at home. But the kids were in residence, and I was a caseworker or counselor for a fairly good number of them while they were there in treatment. And behavior management, if it is a behavior treatment program, if it is implemented with humanity, with a love of people and a concern for your clients, not just like, it's not all like, rewards and punishments, but it's also about the quality of the interaction between the person who's applying those contingencies, let's say, and the client, and a good program has a warmth to it. It isn't dehumanizing as this suggests. If you've ever seen the movie A Clockwork Orange, if you haven't, you should look at that old Stanley Kubrick film from the 1970s. And it tells you a little bit about what the popular view of behavior treatment is, and how dehumanized it is. And that's not what a good behavior management program is all about at all. And there's a lot of other beliefs that it really doesn't, it only addresses the superficial behavior. It doesn't deal with the emotions underneath. And again, if it's misapplied, perhaps that's true. But a good contingency management program, a good behavior program, is going to address those underlying issues as well, including thoughts and feelings, and on and on and on. There's a lot of different kinds of things that we believe about ourselves, or we believe about interventions, that are really misunderstand and misrepresent what contingency management is all about. So just a little bit about some of the specific terms that you run into when you get into contingency management. And this is, again, I will tell you, this is in and of itself, contingency management and behavioral approaches to helping clients really, really much more involved than anything that I can give you, from one or two textbooks as a part of a course of study about individual interventions overall. I mean, this, it's just too much. It's really several semesters in and of itself to become a really effective practitioner in behavioral interventions. So I encourage you to find that and to pursue further training in it, because it is something it's very worthwhile. So some of the basic terms, though, basic concepts in this involve, well, techniques for increasing behaviors. You have positive reinforcement, where a reinforcer is presented following a behavior, a desired behavior, and the future of that behavior is then increased. Let me say this again because my husky just engaged in a little shenanigans and distracted me as I was talking about positive reinforcement. So let me just say it again. Unfortunately, I this program doesn't make it easy to go back and listen to what I said and erase it if I didn't like it and do it again. So I'll just say it again. And that is that positive reinforcement is when a reinforcer is presented following a behavior that is a behavior that's desired, so that the future likelihood of that behavior is increased. It's a reward, basically. So when you put your quarter, and yes, I realize you don't get candy for a quarter anymore, but if you put your quarter into a candy machine, you pull the knob, the candy bar falls down, you're rewarded. And so the next time you have a quarter and you walk past that candy machine, you'll think, hey, this works. Put the quarter in, pull the knob. And, that's the notion of positive reinforcement. Um, you get a reward for the behavior of putting in the quarter and pulling the knob. A mother gives her son praise for doing homework. The praise is the reward. The homework, of course, is the behavior. The father gives his daughter candy for cleaning up toys, those kinds of things. So now the reinforcers have to be relative, so that if when you put the quarter in the machine and pull the knob, and you get a piece of raw beet falls out, or something that you don't like beets, you're not going to put the quarter in that machine anymore. So it has to be a relative, meaningful, and specific to the situation. It has to be timed properly, and there has to be an adequate amount of it, an adequate frequency of it, and on a schedule, so that when you're establishing a new behavior, you reward that behavior pretty much every time it happens, immediately afterwards or as soon thereafter as possible. And you make sure that the reward is in something that the client values, and is sufficient enough to make him feel rewarded. Over time, once that behavior has been established, if you continue to reinforce it every time, the reinforcer loses its value, and you deal with that by going on what's called an intermittent reinforcement schedule, where you reward them every now and then. Sometimes when they engage in the appropriate behavior, they don't get a reward, but they know that they might again. And so, every now and then you give a reward. So okay. Negative reinforcement is something that's actually confused a lot with punishment, and we'll talk about punishment in a moment. But negative reinforcement isn't the application of punishment following an undesired behavior, but rather it's when an event is removed. Let me just say it as it is here: a removal of an event that is contingent on the behavior, and the result of this removal is that the increase in the future probability of the behavior. So you're taking something away, basically, after behavior occurs, and the likelihood is that behavior is going to increase. It's not to extinguish an undesired behavior. You're still encouraging the development of behavior, but you're doing that by taking something away that is undesired, so to speak. So the example here: Bob does the dishes. That's the behavior, in order to stop his mother's nagging, which is the aversive stimulus rather. So the nagging is removed because he does the dishes, and therefore he's rewarded. When your alarm goes off in the morning, you turn the alarm off. So the aversive stimuli is removed by pressing the button on the alarm. So the same parameters apply here as in positive reinforcement. It has to be reinforces all those things, have to mean something. And in this case, that the aversive stimulus has to be aversive enough that removing that stimulus results in the behavior. And the slide says here, the close relationship between negative reinforcement and punishment sometimes influences the effectiveness of negative reinforcement, and we'll talk about that again a little bit more in a moment. There are options for decreasing behaviors. Now you've been talking about increasing behaviors. Now we're talking about decreasing behaviors, and these are called differential reinforcement schedules. And there's many different differential reinforcement schedules here. There's just a few that the textbook points to. The differential reinforcement alternative behaviors. So reinforcement is withheld following behaviors to be decreased in order to let me say this again. Reinforcement is withheld following behaviors to be decreased and are presented following the desired behaviors. So first there's an operant extinction. That's when behaviors are decreased, and then it's presented with reinforcement is presented following desired behaviors. That's the positive reinforcement. So you're both decreasing behaviors and increasing behaviors through differential reinforcement of alternative behaviors. Differential reinforcement of other behaviors, or reinforcement, is offered after a certain time passes in which the undesired behavior doesn't occur. So, every 15 minutes, if Johnny stays in his seat at school for 15 minutes, then he gets a reward. If you're, I'm thinking about obedience training with my dog, and actually the trainer that I've used tries to get dogs to do things without rewards, because she wants the dogs doing things because we give a command for the dog to do it, not because we give the dog a reward. But for some dogs, especially early on in teaching this, you have to use rewards to get the dog, to comply. And so places is a thing where you teach the dog to stay on a mat or stay in a spot, and you leave the room and the dog stays in that spot and stays there until you release the dog from that spot. And so if the dog sits on his rug for 15 minutes without leaving, you give the dog a reward. That's differential reinforcement of other behaviors. Differential reinforcement of incompatible behaviors. You're reinforcing a behavior that is incompatible with the one that you want to decrease. So sometimes there are, for instance, a person who has difficulty relating to other people, and who isolates himself, by staying in a corner, for instance, or something like that. When that person gets up and goes over and interacts with somebody at the candy machine, then you provide reinforcement for the social interaction. It's incompatible with the social isolation. That's differential reinforcement of incompatible behaviors. There are better examples of that. I'm just kind of talking off the top of my head here. Okay, another way to decrease behaviors is called extinction, and that basically is reinforcement that usually follows an undesirable behavior no longer occurs. And a good example of extinction, and actually there's a lesson in this too for individuals who are working. For instance, if you're working with moms who have been very, or dads, who have been very accommodating to kids and indulgent, and the kids become very demanding, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and to the point now where the behavior has become troublesome, because the indulgence has been reinforcing the behavior, the troublesome behavior. You help the parent recognize that, and the parent stops doing that, and of course what happens then? The behavior continues, and it continues, and it continues, and it gets worse and worse and worse. And that's because Well, that's because it's been rewarded all along. And you know what usually happens in those scenarios, if you haven't trained your parents properly, is they're going to give in. All right, all right, all right, and then they go reinforce the behavior after all. And so in those kinds of situations, in extinction, you have to teach people to kind of steel themselves that things get worse before they get better. And go back to that candy machine. If you ever did this, you put a quarter in the machine and it always gives you your candy, but one time it doesn't. You don't just say, "Oh well," and you walk away. What do? You pull on that knob and you pull on the knob and you shake the machine a little and you pull some more and you kick the machine and probably the candy never comes out. Maybe it does come out, but you don't just walk away from it and say, "Oh well." You keep trying and you try harder and harder and you find new ways to try to get that candy by kicking the machine and shaking it. That's what happens with extinction a lot of times. You have to prepare your client for that when they're going about extinguishing a behavior. So that extinction means just simply not responding, not providing the reinforcement. And another concept, response cost. A positive reinforcer is removed contingent on an undesired behavior occurring. So that when this is often combined with a positive reinforcement of a desired behavior. So on a human level, let's say at home, the positive reinforcer being dessert. The kid doesn't get dessert after the dinner because they didn't eat their peas. Okay, the undesired behavior that occurred was they didn't clean their plate, and so the positive reinforcer is removed. That's a response cost. And what we mean by it says is often combined with positive reinforcement or desired behaviors. Of course, the effective thing then is if the kid eats his peas, then the kid gets the dessert, or you find some other way to kind of fill it in. So it's not just a punishment, but it's a teaching mechanism as well. Overcorrection, the results of an undesired behavior are corrected through the restoration of the state, but that state is improved compared to what had existed before the behavior occurred. Um, a kid, I don't know, say a kid's, this is just sounds a little delinquent, but let's say a kid spray paints his tag on the corner of a building, okay, and the kid's caught, and in order to correct that, he doesn't just clean off the tag or paint over the tag, but he has to repaint the entire side of the building. That's overcorrection, and that's just one example of that. A kid, you know, uh, say a kid comes in with um, what I'm trying to think of something involving my kid. A kid comes in with dirty clothes, let's say, and they were new clothes or whatever like that, and so um, you deal with that by and they were careless. I mean, we're not being mean here, but you deal with that by not only having the kid put the dirty clothes in the laundry and change the clothes, but the kid has to do everything that's in the wash basket, in order to correct that behavior. The situation is restored better than it was previously. That's called overcorrection. Timeout is well, following an undesired behavior or following a period of time when a desired behavior doesn't occur, the individual is removed to a less reinforcing environment. But this is supposed to be for a brief period, 5-15 minutes. You send your kid to the room, to his room because he's being intrusive. He's butting into conversations, and so he sent the time out for 5 minutes, or he's too demanding, or something like this. But again, this should be paired to do it well. It should be paired with positive reinforcement for desired behavior. So if you send a child to his room because he's intruding and interrupting in a conversation, when the timeout period is up, you come out and you talk with the child, give him the attention that he's looking for, perhaps. Timeout is one of those techniques that is used a lot of times in residential behavior, pretty routinely, in fact. And when you send a child to the room, to his room for a behavior that was undesirable, or whatever, you have to look at what's in the room, because there's probably a lot of reinforcers in the room, and so it's not really an effective timeout if the child's reinforced by something different. So the use of timeout to be effective really requires being put in a room without stimulus, no TVs, no toy boxes, This would maybe even include books and things like that if you're going to get really effective about it, So timeout's difficult to apply if you're going to make it really effective. Now, we call a lot of things timeout that isn't really timeout, but basically the idea is to get the person out of the environment that is providing the reinforcement that is encouraging the undesired behavior. Then there's punishment. Now, punishment is when an aversive event is presented following an undesired behavior. So we're not talking about removing uh, something aversive. We're presenting something aversive, and that's where the punishment part comes in. So the idea then is that there'll be a decrease in the behavior. But again, aversive events like positive events are all relative to the individual, to the situation, all of those kinds of things. And again, to be effective, it should be combined with positive reinforcement of desired behavior. But as they say here, you want to be careful not to associate the two, or the undesired behavior could increase. So the punishment stops the behavior. Then there's a positive reinforcement for a desired behavior, and uh, uh, the person may begin to engage in the undesired behavior because they know even though they have to put up with some punishment, they're going to get what they want later on. So you have to be careful about that. But this is the least desired alternative behavior, and there are positive alternatives to the use of punishment. Um, you can focus upon the reinforcement of desired behaviors, including the differential reinforcement schedules that we talked about a few slides back. You can engage in some functional communication training, where you're teaching people, a child or an adult in some situations, to use language to convey messages that results in the consequences they want. So remember that disturbing behaviors or undesired behaviors oftentimes have a function that they get something, and so if you can determine what that something is that those undesired behaviors achieve, then teach your client how to talk about, to ask for those things, or to even engage in some positive behaviors to achieve those things, so that you're replacing the function of the undesired behaviors. Developing desired alternatives for obtaining attention. That's what I was just talking about, and non-aversive methods for reducing undesired behaviors, things that that might help, such as relaxation training, exercising, getting out and running. Again, this doesn't mean make the child go out and take 8 laps around the football field, to reduce undesired behaviors. That's punishment. but if it is say for instance something to do with an excessive energy or something like that, then getting the child engaged in exercise would be something that would be a non-aversive and would help to reduce that undesired behavior. And then finally, another method to alter behavior is through what we call rearranging the antecedents. Stimulus control, I think, is what the behaviorists tend to call it. Which is, you do certain things about. Okay, you've done your observations, you've made your contextual assessment of undesired behaviors, and you've identified the antecedents and the consequences. And the antecedents are the cues for the undesired behaviors. So you work to change those antecedents so that cues for desired behaviors are enhanced in the environment, and the cues for undesired behaviors are muted or removed altogether. The antecedent events acquire influence over behaviors through association with reinforcing consequences. Rearranging the physical environment so it can be sued. Okay, reinforcing the physical environment can be used to encourage desired behaviors. An example, I like the example they have in the book. I think is where I saw this. That if you want to encourage talking in a group, look at the arrangement of the room, the arrangement of the furniture in the room, and if there's a bunch of chairs pushed against the wall, push the chairs into the center of the room, so that people are going to sit down and they'll be facing each other or around a table or whatever, and this encourages interaction. Whereas if the chairs are far apart, they're less likely to interact. So you can look at the cues in the environment, um, in the physical environment, and rearrange them to encourage the behaviors you want. Removing cues for competing behaviors can also encourage desired behaviors. Taking television out of the bedroom so that the kids can go to the room and study. Um, I don't know. My kids used to always say that they had music on in the background, they could concentrate more on their studies. I never believed that for myself. When I have music on in the background, I'm usually listening to the music and sometimes singing along and thinking about things associated with the song. It doesn't help me, but some people it does help. But if there are cues in the environment that compete with the behavior you want, then get those cues removed, and the desired behavior is more likely to occur. This is all just some tips, for encouraging behaviors, and I like this, that stimulus control, rearranging the antecedents, yields cooperation without coercion. It's a nice way of thinking about it. So anyway, getting the skills that are needed to alter the behaviors helps the clients become more effective in interacting with their environment and getting the services they need, enjoying more positive relationships with others around them. So teaching these skills to our clients is something that can really be beneficial and have long lasting effects. Remember also that this shouldn't be done in isolation of significant others, isolating significant others from this training and the program, because when you're no longer in the picture, you want to make sure that all the right antecedents and consequences remain in place after you're gone, because it's not going to help if this is just something that happens. People are performing for the worker. You have to engage people in understanding why these things are important, and then you can really help to make some long-lasting changes, I think, in your clients' lives. So that's it for what Gambrill's got to say, at least the high points of what she's got to say. There's a lot more material in the text, and I know you've read the chapters and incorporated all those other things as well. But these are some of the highlights, at least, that I think kind of point the way as to what it is that she thinks will be helpful in working with clients and in learning new behaviors and developing new skills. Okay, thank you. Talk to you later.